During this video, a wide variety of care ideas are discussed to make personal care easier for the resident diagnosed with dementia. No strategy in this video should be implemented without first verifying any resident-specific contraindications or safety issues. Caring for persons diagnosed with dementia requires a unique approach to personal care activities. A good attitude and a positive approach to care can make the personal care activities more pleasurable for the resident and, frankly, less stressful for you, the caregiver. During today's video, we are not going to discuss how to give a bath. You are an experienced care professional. Rather, during today's in-service, we are going to focus on tips, techniques, ideas, and solutions designed specifically for persons with dementia. Care professionals have made great suggestions that hopefully you will find helpful during the course of this video. Before we get started, let's review some basic facts. Number one, always promote resident independence and dignity whenever assisting with activities of daily living. Never do for the resident what he or she is capable of doing for himself. We always want the resident to feel good about the self-care they're able to provide. Number two, set up the environment for success. Now, one of the first things we always want to consider with the environment is that it's comfortable. Remember the fundamentals. Is the temperature right? Is the lighting appropriate? Will my resident feel a sense of privacy and comfort while they're receiving their personal care?
It's a comfortable as possible environment for that resident. That means we need to check on the temperature, not only of the water, but of course of the environment and of the room to make sure it's comfortable for them. The other thing I would make sure is that the noise level is down, that the lighting is good so the resident can clearly see what is happening, and also perhaps to make it even a more social ambience by creation of having some music in the background or things that you would like to engage the resident for participation in helping with the bathing process.
Now, right along with that goes organization. Make sure that you are organized with all of your materials at hand. For example, if you're giving a bath, did you make sure to bring the towels, washcloths, soaps, shampoos, lotion, clean clothing for the resident, etc.? Because whenever we're providing personal care to someone with dementia, we oftentimes simply cannot leave them alone while we go out and gather more supplies. Number three, always think safety. When providing assistance with personal care to a resident diagnosed with dementia, we have to be on the lookout at all times for safety issues because they are not always aware of unsafe conditions in their environment. When we think safety, ask yourself the following questions. Can the resident reach anything toxic or dangerous and use it inappropriately? Shampoos, creams, lotions are all beneficial to our resident if used in an appropriate manner. However, shampoo applied, for example, to the face that could get into the resident's eye could be a very dangerous situation. Look around how you place things to make sure that while they're accessible to you while providing personal care, your resident will not inadvertently grab them and use them inappropriately. Monitor your resident's access to the hot water control. While every residential community should be monitoring the water temperature for safety purposes, sometimes water can fluctuate a little bit. And if your resident has easy access to turn on the hot water full bore, this could definitely cause a dangerous situation. So make sure that your resident is standing or seated in a manner that they're not, for example, grasping or holding on to that hot water control. While providing personal care, did you create a safety hazard? Sometimes while assisting a resident, for example, to brush their teeth or to be cleaning their face, water can fall onto the floor. We always want to make sure we've cleaned that up right away so that it doesn't become a safety hazard for that resident or other residents coming into that room shortly after. We also want to be careful of trip hazards. As you have removed the resident's clothing or placed towels and that near the resident, we want to make sure there are no towels and the like in the pathway that the resident could fall on. Before beginning any lengthy personal care activity, we always want to ask ourselves, do I have enough assistance, enough backup staff support to get involved with this personal care activity, particularly if it's something that's going to take a while, like a bath or shower. At no time should residents ever be left unsupervised. So when you are going to provide personal care that will take a lengthy amount of time, always let your care colleagues know that you're going to be in a room or in a bath area with a resident for some time so that they are supervising the other residents appropriately.
It's always important that the caregiver carry their pages and walkie-talkies so that they can be in communication with other caregivers who may be called for assistance in cases of emergency.
This is also true if you have a resident that perhaps is a particular challenge with bathing, where maybe it might need two of you to get the shower started. Again, is there going to be enough backup staff to provide other supervision to the residents? If not, you'll want to postpone or reschedule the personal care activity. Before beginning personal assistance, we always want to ask ourselves, do I know the capabilities of this resident? Now, if it's a resident you've cared for some time, that isn't a problem. But if you have a newly admitted resident, or frankly, a resident that has gone to the hospital and now perhaps has returned into your community, do you know their current capabilities? Because nothing is more frightening than to start assisting a resident with an activity of daily living only to realize you are in a dangerous position. For instance, if you are assisting a resident to the toilet, only to find out they're no longer able to successfully bear their weight, now here you are in a precarious situation with a resident that you're hardly able to hold on to. We don't want the resident to be injured, and we don't want you to be injured. So the easiest way to avoid this problem is to always be familiar with your resident's self-care capabilities. If you're unsure, ask your supervisor. Consult with the other care professionals in your community. Ask questions. Hey, how's Mr. Smith since he's come back from the hospital? Is he still able to transfer independently? Find that important information out so that care is safe for you and your resident. Always stay up to date with your service plans. Review them often. Number 4, remember, this is the resident's body, not ours. So we want to carry out personal care the way he or she would like it carried out, unless, of course, it's dangerous or contraindicated. If, for instance, your resident would like to have the warm water run an extra few minutes on their back, why not let's do that if that makes the bathing experience more enjoyable for the resident?
Much better to just positively approach the resident, have a warm environment, a calm environment, and let the resident know you're there to help them and assist them with their necessary task. What you might want to present is it more like an enjoyable activity, and maybe you call it a spa day, or I want to help you with this, as opposed to, do you want to take a shower? Do you want to take a bath? It's a natural response to say no when all our lives, none of us have been assisted with taking a shower or a bath.
Remember, providing personal care is not about winning or losing an argument. Providing personal care is all about meeting the resident's need, and this includes meeting the resident's need on their time frame and in the manner they wish to receive personal care. We're now going to look at the provision of personal care and some strategies to make your job easier. One problem we sometimes encounter is that our resident wants to wear the same clothing over and over again. He doesn't realize that it doesn't smell so good or that it's not as clean as it could be. One of the easiest things we can do to overcome this challenge is simply to remove the soiled clothing at night. Make sure the PM shift is aware of the problem we're having with a resident putting soiled clothing on all over again. At night, when they assist him into his bedclothes, rather than leave the soiled clothing in a hamper in the resident's room, simply remove the soiled clothing out of the room so it's unavailable for the resident to put back on in the morning. This is an easy solution that avoids confrontation with the resident, and now in the morning the resident just selects a new outfit to put on. Some residents make poor clothing choices. There are several things we can do about this. First off, limit the choice to the resident. So you might want to hold up one or two outfits. Would you like to wear this outfit or this outfit?
We always want to allow for the resident to be able to have some choices. However, sometimes our residents' choices may not be what we consider to be matching. Better to limit the choices to 1, 2, possibly 3 items that are matched, and the resident can choose from that group. What we want to make sure is that we protect them from any possible ridicule once they leave their room.
Sometimes residents choose temperature inappropriate clothing. For example, it might be 95 degrees outside and the resident is wanting to wear his heavy wool coat. So during different times of the year, you can pack away or remove clothing out of the resident's line of view. Having large storage containers in the resident's room and simply put away the clothing that is temperature inappropriate for that time of year. Some caregivers will occasionally have a problem with a resident actually hitting or striking out at them while assisting them to change their clothing. Let's always remember something. A resident doesn't hit us for the sport of it or for the fun of it. There's a reason for that. Let's look at some reasons this might be occurring. One is something may hurt the resident. They may have an arthritic shoulder or something be painful or uncomfortable to the resident while we're assisting them to dress. The resident may not understand what it is we're doing. This stranger just suddenly comes up to them and starts removing clothing. They may feel violated and react in a more violent manner. Some caregivers invade a resident's body space when providing personal care. They stand too close to the resident that causes the resident to feel uncomfortable or unsafe. Sometimes it's simply the resident is confused or overwhelmed. They don't understand the task that we're trying to accomplish. We need to do task breakdown to put things in simple steps for the resident.
Don't forget, when there's a task to complete, it's always necessary to break down the tasks. Breaking down the tasks means that step by step, you have them complete a portion of the task until the whole task is completed. A good example of this is getting dressed.
So if you're having trouble with aggressive behavior during dressing, let's begin with making clear statements to the resident so they understand what we're trying to do. Approach the resident in a positive manner. For example, you don't want to say, "Boy, that shirt is filthy. We've got to get that off of you." That's insulting to the resident. That's negative. Whereas if we approach the resident holding a nice clean shirt, "Charlie, I love this blue shirt that your wife brought you. You're going to look so nice in this. Let's freshen up a little bit." Review your care techniques. Are you removing clothing and putting on clothing in the most comfortable way? Remember that if the resident has a weakened side, we always remove clothing from the strong side and we put clothing on from the weak side first. Make sure you're using those good techniques so your resident is comfortable throughout this process. Watch out for clothing that goes over the resident's head. Items that have a small neck opening can be very frightening to the person with dementia. If you do have to slip something over the resident's head, put your hands in first and stretch it out a little bit. Hold it as far away from the resident's face as possible as you're slipping it over the resident's head. It's better that it be a little more taut in the back of the head and neck and looser towards the face rather than have it smash right up against the resident's face as you're assisting with a clothing change. If you have a resident that is prone to slapping or hitting, never stand directly in front of the resident when providing the personal care or assisting with dressing. Frankly, you're right in the line of fire at that point. Step off to the side as you assist the resident. It's very hard for the resident to hit sideways or in a backwards motion. Some residents strike out because it's their only way of communicating with us. They perhaps have lost the verbal ability to really communicate their true emotions about how they're feeling. Oftentimes, by the time we are dressing a resident, They are just sick and tired of us fiddling with them. We've gotten them up, we've changed incontinent briefs, we've washed faces, we've combed hair, etc. And it may be that the resident has just had their fill of personal care. And they can't verbally tell us that they're fatigued, they're tired of us grooming them, and so they do the only thing they know how to do, which is to just lash out against us. So watch the fatigue level of your resident. Are they sending cues? Are they sighing? Are they looking distressed that they simply need a break with personal care? You may perhaps allow them to simply relax or enjoy another activity and then come back later on for more grooming. Let's discuss some challenges associated with bathing. Some persons with dementia, particularly when they do not understand what is happening to them, will scream excessively during the bathing process. They may yell out. This is uncomfortable for us, but of course uncomfortable for the resident and other residents in the community that listen to this. It can be very frightening for all concerned. We feel awful when our resident is so frightened and so uncomfortable that they're having to scream because it's their only method of communicating. First, one of the most important things we can do to help a resident feel safe and not threatened in any way in the bath area is to make the bath area as familiar as possible. Encourage family members to bring items from home. I had one resident one time that when the family brought in these little fish with bubbles from her bathroom at home, and we hung those near where she could see as she bathed, she recognized those fish and she realized, oh, this is my bath area and I feel comfortable here. Favorite towels from home, their favorite bathrobe. Even scents can be important to the resident during this bathing process. We want the resident to feel absolutely not threatened in any way.
Well, residents may not quite understand that they need to. They may be fearful when a caregiver tries to approach them, even in the kindest of ways. They're worried about their privacy. Sometimes they're just scared because they simply don't understand why this is happening or may not be clear on the instructions we are providing them.
We want to respond back with a very reassuring tone in our voice. Escalating our voice or yelling a little louder ourselves will only make the matters worse. So we're the care professionals. We need to remain calm and reassuring throughout this process. In addition to a reassuring tone in our voice, say reassuring things. Use the resident's name. Charlie, I won't hurt you. Charlie, you're safe. We're just going to help clean you a little bit. This won't hurt, Charlie. You're safe with me. Reassuring, sweet words to the resident can be very comforting. Keep your phrases simple. Don't keep talking and talking and talking using lots of different phrases. Keep your phrases very calm and very simple during this process.
Well, it's kind of interesting because when we think of communication, we think it's a complicated process. But for our residents with dementia, we like to keep things very simple. We like to first allow them the time to be able to process what we're trying to say.
Some residents feel threatened in the shower area when any water is coming towards them. I know in many of your communities you do have the nice handheld showers. Those can be very helpful. But you know, for some persons with dementia, even a handheld shower feels frightening. So for some residents, using a small plastic container and pouring water over the resident is easier for them. Make sure your resident never feels as though staff is ganging up on him. Now, there are some residents that have trouble transferring safely, and it will require 2 caregivers, maybe even 3, to safely get him in and out of the shower area. Explain to the resident why the other caregivers are there. Charlie, I've asked Susie and Jane just to help me as you get into the shower. They're just going to give us a hand so that you're nice and safe, Charlie. Then once Charlie is transferred in, have these other caregivers back away out of Charlie's line of vision. Because imagine yourself if you were being bathed and there were 2 or 3 people standing around staring at you during the bathing process. You might feel threatened and unsafe as well. For many residents, the most frightening part of bathing is having their clothing removed. It's fatiguing, it's tiring, and they may not understand why it is we're removing their clothing. For some residents, it's easier to first take all of their soiled clothes off in their room and simply put a shower or bathrobe on. That way, once they're transferred into the shower area, the water is nice and warm and ready, the environment's comfortable, and you simply have to slip off the robe and help the resident into the shower. In other words, we're not spending a long time in that pre-shower area removing clothing and drawing out the process. It's a quick, seamless, easy process once the resident is in the shower area. Whenever we're bathing someone with dementia, temperature is essential. They may not have the verbal ability to tell us, gee, I feel a chill in this room. So instead, they react with a very negative behavior. So I can't stress enough the critical importance of making sure the room temperature is appropriate, but also the water temperature. Allow that resident to feel the water before it's ever applied to their entire body, so that they have a chance to experience the temperature of the water and decide that it is comfortable for them. Remember, we're all different. Some of us are very sensitive to warm water and take just but a very tepid type shower, where many of us prefer to have very warm water. Your residents are much the same. So allow the resident to feel the water. Ask them, does this feel good? Warmer? Would you like it warmer? Cooler? Or just look at the reaction on their face. If it's pleasant as the water's running over their hands, then you most likely have the appropriate temperature. Gradually apply the water to their body, perhaps just allowing on the ends of their extremities, their feet, before applying it to their entire torso and trunk area. Be careful of anything that can cause pain or discomfort during the bathing experience. Soaps, especially when applied to the face, it can easily get into the eyes, can make the bathing experience most uncomfortable. Using non-tear shampoos and baby soaps and allowing the resident to protect their eyes appropriately with a washcloth can make the bathing experience much more comfortable. Clothing selection is very important when caring for persons with dementia related to toileting. Residents must be wearing clothing that can be easily pulled down and pulled back up, or else the entire act of toileting becomes a very difficult challenge. If your resident does not have appropriate clothing, consult with your supervisor so the family can be notified. The toilet must be at the correct height. Some residents will resist and become very rigid and fearful of sitting down when the toilet is too low. So make sure that the toilet and the raised toilet seats are adjusted at the appropriate height for your resident. Grab bars on each side of the toilet can also make it more comfortable for your resident to raise up and down. Some residents become fearful of going into any tight or enclosed areas. They resist going into the bathroom. You'll see sometimes they'll even put their hands on the edge of the door jamb as you go to assist them to the toilet area. Occasionally it becomes such an issue with residents that it's actually easier for them to use a bedside commode. Now, always follow your facility protocol regarding the use of bedside commodes. Give the resident a sense of privacy. Again, imagine yourself if you went into a toilet and someone was standing over you, particularly with crossed arms, waiting while you voided in the toilet. You can only imagine how uncomfortable that must feel. So give your resident a sense of privacy while they're voiding. This will encourage them to stay seated longer and fully eliminate. At least step around behind them or out of their view so that they don't feel again as though we're staring at them while they're voiding. For some residents, the problem that we have when toileting them is cleaning them appropriately after they have voided. Consider using moist towelettes, as this tends to make the cleansing process go faster and easier for the resident. For many residents, they are simply not able to reach backwards and clean themselves at all. Having a grab bar firmly attached to the wall so that when the resident stands, they have something firm to hold on to while you cleanse them will make it easier on not only the resident, but you as well. For some residents, using a cleansing bottle is easier. While the resident is still seated on the toilet, use a squirt bottle with some nice warm water in it to cleanse the resident completely. Let's discuss some of the challenges we might have related to incontinent care. When a resident wears incontinent briefs, one of the challenges we have is that they will allow us to remove the soiled brief, cleanse them appropriately, and put on a new brief. Now here's where it's important to know what works for each resident. Some residents do better when they can lie on their bed for incontinent care. So having them lie down with the chucks underneath or other protective item underneath them, and we remove the incontinent brief and cleanse them, rolling them from side to side, is frankly the most efficient. For other residents, they prefer to stand while we do this. So again, you will want something firm for the resident to grasp onto, and then remove the incontinent brief, removing as much of the feces and urine as possible as the brief is taken away from the body. Engage the resident in pleasant conversation so that he does not feel uncomfortable while we're assisting with this type of care. Being very matter-of-fact about it to lessen the feelings of embarrassment is critical to successful incontinent care. Occasionally we have a resident that makes matters worse by putting their hands in the perineal area when we're trying to cleanse them. It's important that we do strategic planning before we start the incontinent care process with this resident. Give the resident something to hold on to. If that's not possible, sometimes having a second staff member that will come in and offer their hands to the resident. Say, Charlie, hold my hands, okay, while we freshen you up a bit here. And they can engage the resident in friendly conversation, holding on to their hands while the other person is doing the incontinent care. Now, I'm not saying in a restrictive way, we would never hold the resident down ever, but simply offering your hands, engaging in that pleasant conversation distracts the resident while the other person is performing the incontinent care. Some residents are highly resistive to incontinent care because we are not making the process comfortable. Again, going back to the environment, do they feel a sense of privacy? Is the room temperature appropriate? If a resident is chilled to begin with and we remove that wet brief, oftentimes a gust of air going past makes the resident most uncomfortable, so make sure the environment is comfortable. Consider the temperature of the cloths you're using to cleanse the resident. A cloth that is too icy cold or one that's too hot makes for a miserable experience. So make this as pleasant for your resident as possible. When providing oral care to the person with dementia, like other activities of daily living, we want them to do as much self-care as possible. For any of us, it is generally easier for us to clean the inside of our own mouths. Some residents, however, may lose the capability for good oral care, and we must assist with the process. Always use gentle, slow strokes when working in the resident's mouth. If you're using very large movements and you're doing it too rapidly, that could trigger the gag reflex with the resident and make this process absolutely miserable. So again, slow, gentle movements as you're helping cleanse the resident's oral cavity. Using a child-sized toothbrush can often make this cleansing process easier than a larger adult toothbrush. Never place your finger between the resident's teeth. Because of impulse control and simple lack of awareness, this could be very dangerous. So for example, if you are trying to loosen the dentures of the resident, you may go from the front and loosen this way, but never reach back in the mouth to loosen the dentures. Residents with dementia are often able to model you successfully. Sometimes you may need to exaggerate your movements slightly to get them to participate fully. There are several challenges that come up when feeding residents with dementia. The first one we're going to discuss is getting the resident to the dining room table to enjoy the experience. Some residents with dementia, when seated in the dining room, will become distracted very quickly and simply get up and exit. One of the best solutions for this is to make sure that the food is ready for the resident to eat before they are brought to the dining room. You may even want to place the food at the setting so that when the resident is seated, the food is there and ready to eat. Some caregivers complain the residents will just not eat. They're too busy doing other things. Well, we want to consider what's the environment like at the dining room table. If they need adaptive devices or special utensils, we'll have them there and available. But we don't want a lot of distractions on the table. For many residents, serving one food at a time is a necessity because if you serve the applesauce and the oatmeal and the toast and the coffee, the resident spends the entire time pouring the coffee over the oatmeal and stirring the toast into that, and before you know it, they haven't eaten but a bite or two because they're so busy stirring and preparing everything. So for some residents, one food at a time is actually easier for the resident. Some residents, when brought to the dining room table, will simply look at the food, become discouraged, and leave. Making sure the food is ready to eat is important, that it's cut in bite-sized pieces and ready to consume. Place the utensil in the resident's hand. Use modeling techniques to encourage the resident to start eating. For some residents, you need to load the food onto the utensil and bring it up to their lips to get them started. Then they're able to continue eating on their own. Be careful about the overuse of condiments on the table. Now, we always want to have our residents' favorite seasonings available for them, but sometimes having the bottle of Tabasco sauce, the little packets of sugar, the salt, the pepper, and the like is overwhelming, and the resident with dementia will use it inappropriately. Some residents also become distracted because they have the wrong table mate seated next to them. Some residents don't do well when someone seated next to them talks excessively. They're better off in a more quiet environment. For those of you that work in communities where residents with rather advanced dementia also reside right along and eat with residents that are very alert, you'll want to make sure that table mates are always compatible. If a resident has someone at the table always barking orders at them, telling them what to do, slow down, pick this up, eat that, no, don't do that, that becomes very discouraging. The resident simply will not eat. So appropriate table mates is important. Make sure the environment is visually attractive for the resident. If you have a yellow tablecloth and yellow plates and you're serving macaroni and cheese on that yellow plate, that's sometimes hard for the person with dementia to be able to differentiate things within the environment. So using different colored plates against the placemats or tablecloth can be very helpful. Some residents may lose the ability to eat appropriately with utensils. Rather than immediately begin feeding a resident, many experts believe it's more beneficial to allow the resident to eat with their hands and utilize finger foods. Follow your resident's service plan and facility protocol regarding the use of finger foods. One challenge caregivers have is that some residents are just not going to sit down, period, and eat that meal. Maybe a day they're pacing excessively, they have a higher than usual anxiety level, and you just can't get them to sit down at that dining room table. For these residents, it may be necessary to have food on the go, items that the resident can easily carry with them as they walk about. A banana is something that is often easily consumed when the resident is on the go. A sandwich with not a lot of filling in the middle can also be easily consumed as a resident is on the go. The use of sippy type cups that have a screw-on lid so the resident can consume a beverage. You can even put nutritional supplements inside these cups that are easy to handle on the go. That way the resident can drink, but there's not a high risk and high probability of the resident spilling on the floor and creating safety or hygiene problems. Some residents have problems with cheeking and not swallowing their foods appropriately. Some residents may actually have swallowing disorders. Always consult with your supervisor for appropriate training in this area. Some of you may face the challenge of residents that will actually need to be fed. They have lost the ability to self-feed. Your approach and how you help that resident eat is very important. Always be seated with your residents. Some caregivers find it useful to use a secretarial type chair that has wheels on it. So if you're having to feed more than one resident, you can scoot this direction and help this resident, and scoot right over here in turn and help this resident without having to get up and move. Every time you get up and walk about the dining area, that is a potential distraction for many residents. Allow the resident to pace the feeding. Some residents enjoy eating at a pretty good pace. They like eating rather rapidly. For most residents, though, they eat much more slowly than what you and I would eat a meal. So we need to allow the resident plenty of time to enjoy their food, chew it properly, and swallow safely. Make pleasant conversation while feeding your resident. Discuss the delicious food that they're consuming. You may even talk about how the food was cooked or prepared. As we care for our residents with dementia, we must be aware they will have additional grooming needs that the more alert resident would not require. Let's talk about eyeglasses. Sometimes our residents with dementia simply do not become aware that how dirty their glasses are getting. So as a caregiver, routinely you'll want to remove the resident's glasses and cleanse them appropriately. Watch out for soiling around the edge of the frame and also back here behind the ears that can collect. Throughout the day, your residents' hands may become dirty. Food and other things can get under their nails as well. So you'll want to make sure you walk your resident to the sink and encourage them to wash their hands, helping out as needed. You may even want to utilize hand sanitizers within your community. Follow your supervisor's guidelines regarding the use of hand sanitizers. Wheelchairs, walkers, and other assistive devices may also need special attention. Be especially aware around the grips where the resident's hands go, if they're getting sticky or soiled in any way. Also keep an eye, has the resident dripped food or other things down the sides of their assistive devices? Keep them nice and clean. Keep these items labeled so that the resident is always using their own devices. If ever you're concerned a resident is not using their assistive device properly, always let your supervisor know. External ear care is important, making sure that we have cleansed thoroughly the entire external ear area. Keep an eye on hearing aids to make sure those are clean. Always make sure you understand the proper cleaning instruction for any assistive device. Never simply put something under running water to clean it. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. When caring for persons with dementia, let's remember these important points. Number one, utilize your service plan. Know your resident, know how they like to have care provided, when they like the provision of care. Secondly, communicate with the other caregivers in your community. Find out what works for each resident. Share successful tips. Number three, always anticipate the care needs of your resident and look for ways to make it more enjoyable. Think about, how could I make this bath easier for this particular resident?
Activities of daily living, though significant, are not all that a caregiver does. Involving the resident with opportunities to achieve quality of life is very important for the caregiver role.
Thank you so much for the dedication you have to the residents that you serve. Your unique efforts in caring for persons with dementia is greatly appreciated. Much success to you as a care professional.